this is what it is. We are now going to have a chat about, and this is a bit more vague, I think, generic systems, setting-based systems, and IP-based systems. What each does best and how much theme is supported by broad design and specific mechanics. We've got quite a few questions from people around this one as well. I think we have kind of discussed.
Can I jump in with something?
Go for it.
Right. So just before this started, I was trying to think of specific setting-based systems and then like generic systems. And in my head, I put Call of Cthulhu in generic system, and then went, well, no, it's not, is it? But like because it's based on BRP, isn't it? And it's basically BRP with a couple of different things. And I feel like you could use Call of Cthulhu for loads of different things.
Yeah.
But it is specifically designed,
I think it's
to run Lovecraftian games.
Yeah.
It is, but here's how I'd think about that. I think it kind of straddles a line between generic and setting based.
Yeah.
Because despite the fact that he put Easter eggs for his other stuff in a lot of his stuff, Lovecraft never intended all his stories to take part in the same world.
Yeah.
In the same, like, he didn't really think about that. That wasn't really a thing then. So the concept of that is a little bit at odds. But also there's a lot of stuff that Lovecraft intended and did that we are gladfully at odds with. So his intentions hardly fucking matter. There is also the fact that a hell of a lot of Call of Cthulhu games, I would say, aren't Lovecraftian. And The Haunting being an absolute primary example of that, which is weird because it is Lovecraftian in that actually Lovecraft did write a lot of more non-cosmic horror. A lot of non-cosmic horror. Some of his most famous stories are non-cosmic horror. But what we think of as Lovecraftian is cosmic horror. So you could do different stuff with it like that. But on the other hand, the setting described within the books is kind of a setting. So it's an odd one.
But I mean, this is a really complicated issue you come to, because it's like, what do you say about D&D? I mean, I know it's not, but it's got its own IP with its own story-based setting that the theme of the book suggests.
IPs.
Well, exactly, multiple IPs. But also, D&D is done with literally everything and is arguably, I mean, I wouldn't say it's the most flexible system out there, but it's used in the most flexible ways for all sorts of things you could possibly imagine. So, like, a lot of things don't fit into a box in this context, do they?
No. No, and you make a good point with D&D because, and that's actually two really good examples for a discussion, right? Because I think what people were thinking was to go, let's throw another one in there, right? I think you've got a range of things here because you've got D&D, which has all these different settings and barely changes the system between them. Ergo, the settings and the mechanics are largely irrelevant to each other. That's not to say it's not always the case. And I know when it had even more settings in the 90s, there would be more mechanics that came along with it. For example, like psionics in Dark Sun. And I think Ravenloft had a kind of terror mechanic and stuff like that. But though they're kind of bolt-ons, right? Rather than adapting the core system.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, you've got Call of Cthulhu, which is probably, I would say, the kind of OG system adapted, like mechanics built to setting. In that, I remember playing Call of Cthulhu and reading about Call of Cthulhu and stuff in the early to mid 90s, and people in like roleplay magazines and whatever being like, "It's amazing! It has a mechanic that matches the theme."
Yeah,
because it honestly was like that was quite a new concept.
Yeah.
And then you've got the end result of this, which is something like the Alien RPG, which feels, other than the fact it's based on Year Zero to begin with, everything that's augmented or changed about the Year Zero system in that feels built from the ground up to evoke the feeling of Alien.
Yeah.
So you've got this like whole wide range of stuff. And I have an opinion on these. One is that mechanics that evoke themes are great. But two, unless they are tuned exactly right, they can really throw a monkey wrench in a lot of scenarios that the writers did not anticipate, the creators did not anticipate.
Yeah.
And I think the alien stress mechanic is actually a perfect representation of that.
Mm-hmm.
In that, it works really fucking well for relatively short, high tension one shots.
Yeah.
It does not work well for more protracted things because you gain stress way too quickly and easily. And you have this thing where your characters are constantly one step short of dropping into a catatonic state. And it doesn't quite flow right. Now, that can be tuned and homebrewed and whatever, and that's fine. But it's one of those things where I always think on the surface, mechanics matching theme, amazing.
Mm-hmm.
In practice, often getting that right is very difficult.
Yeah, that was the same thing I would comment on the Call of Cthulhu one shot with Sanity. And I would have the opposite feeling in that Call of Cthulhu is very much built for the long form story.
It's tuned for
the
a
sanity
campaign.
mechanic, and it's deliberately designed that way, and that's fine. But in future, for me, using that system, I would want to change how it worked, or at least be aware of that in context. Whereas that's not immediately apparent from reading the book, so you don't realize that until you play and go, "Oh, Sanity's meant for long-term build-up." If you're playing this over a story based on a single day, you're never going to hit that threshold. And I think that again is a good example of that. It's really effective, but it's got a specific context it's meant to be used in.
Yeah, and with both of their systems, again, Call of Cthulhu. If you try and push it, if you try and pack in an appropriate amount of sanity loss into a one shot, such that somebody goes mad, especially in the confines of a one shot, it's essentially that's it for that character. It's great having the threat present. It's great having the gun on the table, but when it goes off, it's going to blow a hole in your story, probably.
Unless you have sort of engineered things to happen in that direction in the first place. And obviously, again, it goes without saying, like, obviously, you can just do something like, well, all sanity losses are doubled or something like that for the one shot, and it kind of fits. But yeah.
And then, like, there's a system like Warhammer, which has specifically, for example, the depth of the leveling in Warhammer and the injury system and the corruption system and the magic system. All that builds very much over long periods of time. And in actual fact, a lot of that feels almost dissatisfying to even play a short story in. Like, our story was 13 sessions, and we really haven't touched on a lot of that stuff. We got quite lucky and weren't injured very much. Corruption's only played a tiny part in the story so far. Like, there's lots of things that I feel like literally the game says weeks to months for periods of time that it's talking about for these things. And the leveling is super in-depth and long-term career based. So it's like, this is very much not a one-shot system where all the satisfying things come into it. So, yeah.
And like the classic example of that, of how that varies and how that's such a subjective topic mechanic-wise, is XP gain. Where different people have such different expectations of power creep, XP gain, whatever, that it can really lead to kind of like a jarring disconnect between members of the same group. I am notoriously slow burn with my XP drops. I think that incremental progress over time is far more impactful for character development and for storytelling and narrative than you know, third session and you've got your ultimate power or whatever, but which is obviously an exaggeration. But I have played with people who have been like, if I don't make a significant improvement on my character sheet every 2 sessions, it feels pointless. And I could be dismissive of that and just be like, oh, go play a video game then or something, but like, which is incredibly dismissive and patronizing. But it's so at odds. Like, if I was doing that with players, I probably wouldn't want to run the game.
Yeah.
Because I'd just be like, well, it's just like silly. And then you're going to ratchet up to your max in like 20 sessions and then you'll get bored. Like it's about the little satisfying, like the spread of stuff. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
It depends on context, doesn't it? I mean, that's a
yeah.
very beer and pretzel style gameplay sort of thing, isn't it?
Mhm.
You know, your characters are all about leveling and building and getting amazing gear and stuff like that. And I think it generally fits less with our play style for the channel.
Yeah, like we don't trend towards the Munchkin style of play, and it's like, yeah, but I mean that's a classic example of how every game that's designed has had to think about, well, what fits in this is the intent that the characters become powerful, in which case we should probably tune it so they become powerful more quickly. You know, these are the kind of things where you start, when you've played enough games or you try and design your own games or whatever, you start to really, it starts to become apparent it's not just as easy as slapping a generic set of rules onto a setting and making it feel like it fits. With that in mind, what do we think about genetic systems that can be slapped onto any like open Savage Worlds or GURPS, 1,000 other different ones? So any currently popular ones, like open generic role-playing systems?
I think totally open's less popular, actually, isn't it? It's usually open within a theme.
Within a theme or something, yeah.
I can't think of.
Is there one called Ice? Or is that just a system that's used in other games? I can't remember.
There's Fate as well.
Fate, yeah.
So I played I played a game that was using Fate Accelerated for like a free RPG day thing. And that was good because the way that it works is you have like, I think it's 6 stats or something, and you can basically, when you don't need to set them out at the start when you create your character, and when it comes time to roll that thing, you can pick your number between 1 and 6 or whatever it is, and then you just roll. So that's good for literally a pickup game, you know, like a convention game or something like that, where people might walk in, you go, oh, we've got a spot free, doesn't really matter for the story. And you know, equally, I think if you're playing something where maybe something more real world, I suppose, if you were playing like, you know, like a spy game or, you know, something like that, where it's like you don't need a magic mechanic, or you don't need a whatever mechanic specific, they're probably fine. I've not played much with them apart from BRP, which somebody in my other role-playing group likes to use for a lot of games. And we'll typically, you know, tack on a couple of stats that are different for that specific game or whatever. And obviously that's what's used in Call of Cthulhu, so I'm used to using that system, and that works. But yeah, that's all I've done really, BRP and Fate Accelerated.
I did play a game of, a game using GURPS once, but essentially it was a Call of Cthulhu style story told through GURPS. So, like, from my point of view as a player, I couldn't really tell the difference. You know, it worked really nicely. There is I've not used it or read it, but there's the Cypher system.
Yeah. Is that the Monty Cook one?
Yes.
It's what's used in Numenera. I've played Numenera.
Yeah. I remember it well because I backed a Monty Cook Kickstarter campaign that just turned into the Cypher campaign Kickstarter after, with its like add-ons and things, and I was just like, this isn't what I backed, but sure. I still did get what I backed, but I didn't like it very much.
I think it's interesting here to kind of look at the difference, because as you said, Steve, you know, that game in GURPS, it was a Call of Cthulhu story, was good, and it wasn't like, you know, you were missing the fact that the Call of Cthulhu game wasn't there, the system wasn't there. It's interesting for people who don't want to own a shelf of books like Matt does in the background. There is something to be said for having a system that can do anything, and maybe the inspiration can be found online or from other stories you've played in or whatever, and you can tack little bits on as guides. And so I think that's actually really fair. And the specialist aspects of all the books that we have, usually I think the system is one of the least important parts of that, and it's the theme and the story guidelines and the other stuff the books come with. You know, often even the visuals in the book are more important than mechanics. Sometimes there's really useful mechanics, but generally speaking, I feel like the system, if you've got one system you like and you're happy with, that's almost better than getting every system for every setting.
There's one element that you might have a view on. So systems that add the sort of specialty of travel, of journeying. So
Yeah.
things like Mutant Year Zero, Forbidden Lands. I'm presuming
Ring.
Twilight.
One Ring.
One Ring, yes, of course. I haven't played One Ring. I haven't played Twilight 2000, but I presume all of those systems. Well, certainly the first two. They try to give the idea of journeying. There's flavour there.
Yeah.
There's mechanics.
Yeah.
There's an aim that they want to create.
Yeah.
Some, now I didn't play the One Ring, but I hear that has quite a good.
It's got quite it's got quite
good.
in depth, not crunchy, but quite thought through traveling mechanics. I think they're pulled back a little bit from the first edition that was Cubicle 7 rather than.
Okay.
I think you don't have like the traveling roles anymore. I could be wrong because I haven't actually implemented the traveling stuff in the One Ring stuff we've done on the channel yet.
Yeah.
But originally, it did have a thing where everyone in the Fellowship had to take on a role in the traveling of like the scout and the hunter and stuff like that. The other thing that a lot of Year Zero engine games from Free League do is have base building mechanics. Mutant Year Zero, Forbidden Lands, Coriolis with the ship.
Lesson.
Yeah.
Vesson. Okay, yeah.
I mean, you've got Wicked Ones, which has a massive amount of base building when the whole dungeon.
Yeah, I mean, it's essentially Dungeon Keeper, the role playing game.
Exactly.
Right? So and these things all they, like I say, they all help to flush stuff out, but like unless you tune them right, they can really get. And I think there is something to be said. Like Sam made a good point there of like the economic argument. Like if you have one system and you can adapt it for any setting, like why would you not want that? But I guess also there's the kind, not the flip side of what we've been talking about, but the other aspect of like, and I mentioned OSR. If anyone doesn't know what that is, it's old school revival. It's like a movement within TTRPGs to kind of go back to basics, I suppose. When D&D was more what I would think of as a skirmish game rather than necessarily a role-playing game. But even stuff that is really flavorful, like Mort Borg has, I mean, I'm pretty sure like how Mort Borg runs is very intentional. I have no illusions about that. Stockholm Cartel have definitely put it together in the way they want it to be put together. But I think you'd struggle to say that it had mechanics that particularly pushed forward the feel of the game. It's old school revival in that it's just like you have like 4 stats and you roll a die and you've done it or you haven't, and like there's hit points and there's damage, and that's essentially the game, and that's kind of it. And there is a lot of old school revival. There's a lot of old school revival that kind of drags it to like that skirmish game feel of like, well, we don't want a story or atmosphere or anything like that. It's essentially a game. In a more classical sense, where you are trying to beat the game by playing it. But then you have stuff like Mort Borg, which uses this incredibly bare bones system with just a few little pieces on top of like, oh, this is how a scroll works, and this is you have omens for rerolls and stuff. But even those, they're like phrased in evocative ways. But the actual mechanics are just like, okay, you know? But even with that, they've created this incredibly atmospheric, kind of rich without being deep. Is that a way to? It's very evocative, but not because there's a lot of material, or at least not a lot of official material.
It's not overwhelming.
There is now a colossal amount of Mort Borg material, but the vast majority of it is through open license. But like the fact that you open people talk about Mort Borg and like, let's use this. I've been using things as an example, so why not use this? So Mort Borg, if anyone isn't familiar with it, it's kind of like it's basically like a black metal role playing game, like the grimmest of darkest sort of fantasy settings. It's really good. There's a couple of one shots on the channel if anyone wants to participate in watching it. Like I say, it's very rules light, OSR, basic stuff. But the reason it is evocative and the reason the theme really works has nothing to do with the rules. Really. Although I suspect Stockholm Cartel would argue that the basicness of the rules is what.
Yeah, they would.
Either through a mission of anything between the theme and the player, or most things between the theme and the player, other than being rulesless, I suppose. Or the fact that it has this kind of like old school grindy hack, kind of like cut and thrust sort of feel to it, and makes it inherently feel dangerous. Because as the players in my one shots know, you could just die in your first turn of combat on the roll of one fucking die, like because it's got that OSR feel. But also just because, as I say, like it doesn't have people see it as this setting-based game, and I know a lot of people consider it like pretentious, and they don't like the art punk presentation and stuff like that. But literally, if I can, the actual setting is given, and virtually all the lore is given in like 14 pages at the beginning of Mort Borg. Like it's extremely light, and everything else is just drip fed through like tables and the character creation and stuff like that. For like, I genuinely think, and I know it's Marmite, but Mort Borg is a masterclass in how to completely evoke setting and theme with barely anything.
Yeah,
like there's barely anything there. But I sat down and read Mort Borg back to front, which I rarely do with a role-playing game. And went, I completely know what to do with this. Because the rules didn't push it forward. Even the material in this, as good as it was, but it was just how the entire package was put together made me go, I understand Mort Borg.
Perfect. And to offer a total counterpoint to this, the original, I don't have it anymore because it was so unwieldy. I never actually used it. But I would love to put it up in front of the camera now to show. It was about this thick. It was the original Traveller 5, I think, but full rule book that I had, which was just like absolutely unbelievable. It had, chapters and chapters of worlds and story and all sorts of things like that. And then it must have had about 400 pages at least of mechanics for everything. Like, whole planet building systems, whole star system building systems, whole spaceship, all via dice and random systems, like species. You could build different types of species using it and all that sort of thing. And like, it was amazing. I never used it ever for anything. It was so much that I never managed to read half the book because it was just overwhelming. And I think that's a certain niche, but I seriously question how much of that book has actually been used by people in an actual roleplay setting, as opposed to, I imagine quite a lot of people have sat down and enjoyed reading it. But like, personally, from an actual role-playing perspective, I don't think that's very helpful or good or actually what I would want. And it never gave me much of a feel for the world. And in fact, I read through the world stuff in that and then decided to screw it and just made my own world off it anyway. Whereas I feel like the Mort Borg world, because it's got such a neat feel to it, but it's also so flexible. It hasn't given you like 4 chapters worth. You'd never read that and go, I don't want to run it in this world. You'd be so enraptured, and you'd know you had the total freedom as well.
And also, what would be the point in like
exactly.
going, I'm going to use Mort Borg rules to run something else? Well, why? Just
why
use any other really basic system.
Exactly. It's almost like by Traveller, and I'm not complaining at all. I think Traveller is a brilliant system. I love it, and I use the slightly narrowed down version still for stuff I run. But it's, by comparison, it's like Traveller narrows itself by having more stuff there rather than widening the system. So
Jonny, Steve, I think me and Sam have rambled a lot there.
I like rambling.
I think for me, it's what I look for in a system is the nebulous idea of potential, like a spark, like something that can kick things off. And obviously, Mort Borg, it's a bit. I'm going to say it's a bit like Dark Souls in that when you're reading the lore at the front, it's not, here's the world, here's what's going on. It's just bits. It's just bits of story that they've stuck on the page and you're reading. So there's no framework. It's just raw potential. And if you get that flavor, and I bounced off the book hard the first time when I was reading it just in PDF format, where do I start? How do I read this? But then for me, somehow, looking at the physical book, it suddenly made a lot more sense. It was just, the art, the grunginess of it, the wonderful depictions of all of the weapons on one page, the random tables that talk about the end of the world, the prophecies. I forget what they call them now. The
Psalms, right?
Yeah.
Are they called the sort of meta thing that you can for people's context? There's like so there are. I think I'm probably getting part of this wrong, but there are like there's these prophecies of like the end of the world in Mort Borg, and I think there's 66 of them. And the idea is that every time you run a story or a session of it, you roll to see if one of these prophecies happens. And you can tune what length you want the end of your game to be by, it says, like, if you want a short campaign, then, they'll like come up with a 1 on like a D4. If you want a longer one, they'll come up with blah, blah, blah. But the idea is at the end, is it 7, I think? When 7 prophecies have happened, the world of Mort Borg ends. And then, as the book instructs, burn the book.
I've got the final one here in front of me. All praise Verhu, beaming with delight. All praise the fire which burns all, and the darkness shall swallow the darkness.
So again, they're evocative, but also completely open to.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Well, if you roll it, you better find out, because you're going to do it. Jonny, thoughts on anything we've said?
I like a simple system because what I don't want is for somebody to have to make a roll and for us to then have to spend 5 minutes looking at a rule. Yeah. Because that detracts, like, then everybody's out of the game, right? If it's make this roll, oh, you've been hit, great, that's fine, we're then on to the next bit. If it's like, and that's part of the problem that I have, like, I quite like 5e, but unless you've got people really knowing exactly what all of their stuff is that they can do in a combat, it can drag, because they go, I haven't used this in a bit, I'll look at what this is, and it's kind of like, at the time you're like, yeah, it's fine, but actually what it's doing is detracting from the story that you're trying to do together, which is a shame. So and I don't really think, like, somebody can't necessarily know off the top of the head all of the stuff that their character can do, because you end up being able to do a lot of stuff, and there are multiple options with each thing that you can do when you've got spells and that do different things at different levels, and you've got people who can do 2 attacks and then a bonus action extra attack, or they might want to use that bonus action to do something, and then it just goes on and on and on and on.
Interactions between players and effects, and
Yeah. So I suppose that I like something where you just roll and then that makes something happen. That's it.
It's valid, and I think World of Darkness can fall into the same trap of, like, I've got 10 different disciplines, like I can't remember. And it's often the thing I always say to players when I'm playing games like that, where like characters have unique powers. I do always say it's on the player to understand that, and like just write it down. I mean, Simbaroom has the same thing. Like, write it down, because I can't keep it all in my head, so I'm relying on you to know what your character does. But one of the problems as well with that, of like eventually it becoming overload, is that, like, because the player often has less of a fundamental understanding of the rules than the GM, they can misinterpret it, and then you realize that you've been playing a rule wrong for like 30 sessions. Looking at you, Simbaroom. And then you have to like decide what to do with that. Especially when for 30 sessions you've been going, oh, that power of yours is so OP.
And
then you're like,
what I'm also enjoying about doing Vesen is like, explicitly in this game, you don't have to fight the baddie to win. Like, you can obviously do that in anything, in D&D you could have a conversation with, unless it's like something that doesn't understand your language, but like, there are numerous ways to solve the problem.
It's
in
fundamental
Vesson,
in
which-
Vesson, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
which is really cool that it's like explicit to the game that's
Yeah. Like somehow that's not explicit in Warhammer, for example, compared to Vesson, you know.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, they, you know, yeah, they don't. You can't
Don't tend
really
to talk.
negotiate with Skaven.
Not so much.
no.
No.
Um,
I'm just gonna. I want to speak up for the. Sorry, Matt. I know you. I want to speak up for the mechanical things as well, though, because I think there is an element to be said that, like, mechanics, more than just the very, very simple, can add extra, like, not just stuff to happen, but also extra elements to imagination of what's going on in circumstances. Like, we're giving examples like, well, the darkness in Cimmeroom, but like, you can imagine what, like, for example, Sam's character is doing or John's character is doing with the riposte in Cimmeroom. Or in Warhammer, there's specific things like that that really fit and actually like do enhance characters a bit as well. And I think the system that I'm making, I'm deliberately trying to make it so that I have some complicated mechanics in the game, but they're all there to tell story. Like, the dice rolls will tell more about what's going on. And sometimes games like Mort Borg bother me a bit. They don't give so much. Dice rolls just like, well, what does that mean? What's actually happening, sort of thing. And I think a little bit extra can be quite useful and interesting for the GM.
It can. I think you go to the other extreme with something like the Fantasy Flight Star Wars games, which
absolutely.
we have dabbled in a little bit, where they have specific dice for adding complications to rolls. And again, this is the tuning. And it's a great idea, but it happens on most rolls. And it's like, I'm not going to I can't try and think of like an interesting complication, or like in terms of, oh, something interesting helps you, or something interesting on every single goddamn roll, which is the likelihood, given how it's tuned, to the point where when I ran an offline campaign, me and one of the players, who's quite mechanically minded, basically came up with a new tuning for the dice, which because they're custom dice and pricey ones, because it's Fantasy Flight, made it quite frustrating. That I was like, I've paid all this money for this goddamn dice, and now I have to use this awkward sort of homebrew thing to still. Anyway, so again, it's balance, right? Before we we've got a few questions that apply for here, again from Synchronous. So what we should probably do is answer them and then ramble a bit, and then fuck off and go to bed. So no way biased, in no way biased by my own personal experience there. So we've got a question: what is your favorite genre or style of game to either GM or play in? For all these questions, let's go with the magic die again. With the I can't think of what Johnny's going to say, but I don't know why I rolled. Why did I roll a fucking D6 for people? Steve, what genre of game or what style of game do you like to GM, and what do you like to play in? We're all going to say horror, aren't we?
Well, so mine's a slightly more. So I like investigative games. I like games where there is a mystery, that there is something that I can actually think about as a player, as well as having a character solve stuff. So anything where there are sort of hidden depths, things to discover. I love that sort of stuff. So obviously, Call of Cthulhu is a it's a good fit for me. I'd quite like to at some point see how Blade Runner goes. That could be interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's my quick take.
Yeah. That is appreciated. Sam.
Yeah, I think we touched on it a bit with what I've been making and stuff like that. So world builders and world explorers, things when it's like what's around the next corner, what can be found, and especially things like that give kind of not just an appearance, but a feel, like maybe a culture, or like, and you can build that as you go and develop that as you play and discover places that like players build, that a bit of collaborative element in there I always enjoy if it's possible. So I used to be really into space stuff for that very reason. It tends to open that up, but recently I've kind of, I don't know, I'm not sure specifically theme. It could be anything nowadays. Quite fantasy happy as well. So
Jonny, I'm on tenterhooks here. I don't know what you're going to say.
I'm going to throw a mild spanner in the works by saying, so I obviously do really like running horror-y stuff and sort of more folk horror specifically. Although with the Space Cthulhu stuff, it's been proper cosmic horror. But partly, I also really enjoy running, as I said, like a big sprawling fantasy thing.
Yeah.
But in the same way as I ended up having a like solo music, not career because I didn't make any money from it, but I did that because it was too much effort to put a band together. And in that same sort of way, horror stories fit the short form better than fantasy stories.
Yeah.
So by virtue of like struggling to get people together for more than 10 sessions, like doing horror is a better way to use that time than doing fantasy.
I feel you. World builders really do not fit the not having done short sessions, not having done long sessions.
For sure.
Matt.
Thank you, Jonny. The genre I enjoy playing best. My answer for this might be limited, and it's probably cheating if I just say World of Darkness. But I guess urban horror, urban fantasy kind of things float my boat. I'm a child in the 90s in that way. Despite the fact I've run quite a bit of sci-fi and fantasy now, sometimes I've got to be quite happy with the sci-fi and fantasy to like I would say I could run almost any horror game, but I couldn't run almost any fantasy or sci-fi game because I'd find the settings boring to a certain degree. So I don't know. Make that maybe horror. I'd might be my favorite or horror adjacent. In terms of the type of game I like to run most, because people have given quite like focus at like investigative or like the type of plot or the type of structure. I've talked about this before, and there's no one word for it. It used to be something that in the 90s I would refer to as being a sandbox, but now sandboxes are way more sandboxy than when I was a kid. So, like, it's not really that. What I'm talking about is a game in a setting, right? I'm not finished. A setting which the players spend all their time in, like a city or an area. It's usually a city or a settlement of some kind, right? And they exist in it, and there's an element of that they have to exist, kind of story to story, day to day, moment to moment, right? Against some kind of odds. Like, it's not, the city might not be hostile to them, or the setting might not be directly hostile to them, but survival is to some degree a challenge. While they're existing, their actions influence the sandbox of play of all these different factors and things that are happening. And while that's also happening, I am also setting narrative going, because all the different factions have their own goals and their own interests, and they're all working towards a cause. And underpinning it all is probably a story that I'm laying seeds for as I'm going along and trying to keep moving forwards by various ways. This is, and again, going back to World of Darkness, this is an absolute classic Vampire the Masquerade type setting. And that's probably why it's baked into my role-playing DNA. If you want if you think, ooh, that sounds interesting, and want an example of it, you can go watch the least popular series we've done on the channel so far, which is Blades in the Dark, where I kind of did that in an online stream kind of way. To a certain degree, Vampire 5 Ed campaign was kind of an example of that, but it was much more railroaded and guided than I would normally do in terms of that. But a lot of my offline campaigns, especially my World of Darkness campaigns, especially my Vampire campaigns, follow this thing of like, there is a setting, I want the characters to become invested in that setting, I want it to become familiar to them, but always with elements, new elements that are opening up, new things happen, new characters enter the field of play, people they know, allies become enemies, enemies become allies, they all have their own motivations, and underpinning it is a central meta story that runs through. And Sam's very familiar with this because he was in one of my Vampire campaigns that did exactly this. But yeah, that whatever that is my jam. Yeah. Next question we've got: are there any IPs that have already been turned into TTRPGs where you felt they did a particularly good or bad job with it? What did they get right or wrong? And the first person to answer this is going to be who's that? That's Sam.
I'll just go with the first thing that comes to my head. Well, I guess there's two little things that I think The first thing that comes to my head is actually the One Ring. I have never GM'd it, but all of my experience of being in it, I actually find even down to like the character sheet, it's just so perfect for the setting that you're just immediately in it. You know, you're doing your character sheet, and you're like, I am ready for Tolkien right now. The fact that like the game is based around hope rather than health, for example, it's like your character doesn't die; they just give in. It's like there's no other roleplay like that. It's so evocative in how it's the whole thing set up, and looking through the book and reading it. Oh yeah, it's
you have a riddle stat and a song stat.
Exactly.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
what other games do that? So yeah, I think it just matches the IP perfectly, and that particularly with Tolkien is quite an important IP to match. So I think that's.
I thoroughly agree. I think in the past and in various things, there's a lot of kind of stuff that tries to do Tolkien in a generic fantasy way. And one of the first things you realize if you're a fancy person who maybe has come to Tolkien late or arrived at it via circuitous means is that even though it has a reputation for being the most generic of generic fantasies, it is in fact anything but if you delve into it. So
exactly,
and that's a great answer.
My honorable mention is I haven't done bad, but good. Is End of the World. I think End of the World is another just really evocative setup. That I mean, it's not really an IP, I suppose, but you know, End of the World is quite a specific setting.
The IP is our world, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that I feel like just all the mechanics in that, which are very very basic, again, just perfectly fulfill that, and you creating your own character, which is you typically, and the stories that it gives you in that. Yeah, I think they did a really good job with that. The one problem I have with it is that once you played it, you kind of are done with it, and I've played most of them now, and don't really have any urge to ever play them again. So I didn't keep the book for that one, just for that reason.
That's fair enough. I've rolled myself next, so I guess I will go. IPs that I'm a fan of the role-playing games for. I'll give little honorable mentions first to Alien, because despite my complaints that I think it much more suits one-shots than a campaign, that's fine. I prefer to play it as one-shots than campaign, and I think the mechanics are pretty well thought out, maybe a bit overtuned, but they do the job, and it's great. I will actually nominate, and because it's me, I guess these are some slightly more obscure picks because I'm a nerd. There is a role-playing game called Amber that I've talked about 1,000 times on the channel, maybe. It's a series of books from the late 60s and early 70s, I think. Don't quote me on that, by Roger Zelazny, that are called The Chronicles of Amber, where you play incredibly powerful, incredibly devious members of the family that rules the multiverse, and there's a very small amount of extra rules, but the rules are basically this: you have 4 stats which run from -100 to +100, and if your stat is higher than the other person's stat, you win. That's it.
Yeah.
And the fact that it's got such huge scale to it gives you some indicator of like humans average out at -25 on that scale. So you know where the kind of characters and the NPCs sort of stand. And I love it because everything from the character creation to these kind of like this focus on who's better at what than hit someone else is really evocative for the setting of Amber. Which is like they are the worst backstabbing, like they're just relentlessly politicking and fighting against each other and stuff, and it's just really great for that. The other one, which is kind of related, I actually really rate. It's very crunchy, but I really rate the Song of Ice and Fire role-playing game from Green Ronin? Let me turn and check. It is from Green Ronin, which and there's a lot that similar to Amber. It's got like mechanics. It's like the opposite of that. It does that sort of encourages that kind of play by having loads of rules. Like there's rules on there's chapters on combat. There's chapters on literally the rules for politicking.
Yeah,
politicking. There's literally, I think the first time I played it, or the only time I played it, we took 3 sessions to create our house.
Yeah.
And our characters. Like, really in depth. and you have this whole one of the advantages of Song of Ice and Fire, and to a certain extent also the TV series, is that the lore sinks so deep in terms of like, and then this house and this heraldry and that person and like all this stuff, which can be overwhelming for a lot of people. But if you do want to sink into that game feels like those books. So I think those are some real, maybe more left field examples. Because most of my favorite role playing games, I'd say, aren't IP based, stuff like World of Darkness, right? Who else we got? We've got Jonny.
Also honorable mention for Alien and Dragon Age, which is probably one of the first, I think maybe the first IP based RPG that I played, which is also Green Ronin, and based on the Fantasy Age system. That's really cool, sort of bringing the setting and the character classes kind of crossover from that. And also the Beowulf RPG, which is based on 5e, but is made specifically for a GM and one player. You can have more than one player, but the idea is that your one player plays the hero, and there are mechanics for your followers. There are mechanics for your hall. When you set off, you roll d20 for like portents for good or bad things that may happen over the, like it builds the world before you set off on your adventure. Like the game is the adventure, but you set off knowing that all this stuff is back home and that these things, may or may not happen over the course of your journey. And sort of building that grand sort of mythology kind of thing that Beowulf, the poem does is quite cool. Disclaimer that I do know the people who created the game, but I do genuinely think it's very good, and I still really want to run it on the channel if I can find somebody brave enough to do a single single player GM thing on the channel.
That sounds fun. I'd like to do that.
Can I just say, there we go. That's a one shot sorted later this year. Can I just say, when you were starting that, I really thought you were going to go. So I really like Beowulf, which is based on, and I thought you were going to say Beowulf. Steve, how about you? I suspect Alien is floating over the horizon.
Yes. I think, like, obviously there's the aspect of Alien RPG, and the stress dice mechanic does have its issues. But I think the thing that they did really well is like the book and the rules really evoke the atmosphere of the world, the universe, especially, and this is the thing that I really like Alien RPG for, the cinematic mode with like motives, personal, I forget what they call them, like motives essentially, but the underpinning secret goals that each character has. The first time we played it, that put in so much extra depth into the game. It was one that Matt ran off screen. This was everybody had their ulterior motives, or were trying to do their own thing, and that just again it elevated the game, but it also made it feel very, very much like the world of Alien. I haven't played too many other games, I don't think, that were based on IPs. I mean, there is Tales from the Loop, which is sort of...
Yeah, I mean, it is. Starlin Haag wrote the stories and did the art before it came out, so it is. Yeah, it's just not very well known.
That's true.
I think that the game really does sort of present the world in his illustrations.
Yeah,
it really does.
Yeah.
We need Chris here to talk about Dune.
We do.
And The Expanse and any number of other things.
Absolutely.
So there's two little questions. So we are running a bit over here, but hopefully if my fellow discussers need to jump off, they'll flag it in private chat, I'm sure. But there's the last question from Syncaduce, and then I have an extra one, and then we'll go to chat and quickly field things there. Are there any older TTRPGs or settings that you wish would get a new edition or release but haven't so far. What was it about them that you liked / loved? And we'll probably give quite quick answers on stuff from here on in, just because we are kind of running out of time. But just doing the old random number generator there. Sam, anything from you on that one?
I'm not very clued in with TTRPGs very much. I can't think of
That's
anything
fine.
offhand. Yeah.
That's fine. I think it's quite rare now for something old and popular to not have.
Yeah,
a
exactly.
current
I feel like they've all
release
got them. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. And then it's me. I'm going to cheat and give my previous answer of Amber. I think Amber could actually do with a really good re-release. Some of the art in the original one is great. Some of it is god awful, like really fucking bad. And it's fairly like confusingly laid out and stuff. And I'm hoping that will come alongside. There is an Amber TV series in development. Linked to, oh god, is it linked to Guillermo del Toro? It might be, or someone else. It's like a pet project because someone else who loves those books, I guess, as I do. And yeah, so maybe that will happen. But otherwise, I feel like I'm actually someone who often, if there's a new edition and I've got a previous edition, I don't bother. Unless it really changes it up. Like, I've resisted, like, even I'm a World of Darkness nerd and I do not own half of the editions that they eventually came out with in the late 90s and early 2000s. So like, I'm not that bothered if I feel I've already got what I need. So yeah, not especially. Jonny, how about you?
I'll cheat my answer a little bit because it's not necessarily an RPG, and also I don't want a new version. I just want it to be easily available here, which is the 1000-Year Vampire, because
Sure,
I really want to do that. But like, if you want the book, you've got to order it direct from the creator, which is fine, but it's like coming from America and costing the money that it costs for things to come from America.
You want like a more easily available version.
Yeah, but like, I don't think there are any sort of older systems that I don't have that I want, and I don't particularly want a new version of the games that I already have.
Sure. Steve, you're probably one out of most of us who's most into editions and like the collection aspect of things. Does that be fair?
Yeah.
Looks at books behind Matt.
But that's not collection. That's all practical.
I do like to, I'm interested by a whole bunch of things. I do like to pick things up, even if I never get around to playing them. I'm interested by Dragonbane coming out again. I'd never heard of that before, but it turns out there's a vast amount of history, so that's sort of interesting from a curiosity point of view. The book I held up earlier on, this is one of the original modules that came out with Basic Edition D&D was Keep on the Borderlands. Try and get it, which was thin. It was a thin pamphlet, very basic. Okay, nice. Yeah. And you had to flesh out most of the stuff yourself. And now, obviously, it's been sort of 5E'd, and somebody's gone through and filled in a huge amount of stuff. It's vast. But the thing I like about these and this particular style of reissue is there's a whole bunch of interviews and background material into the people who wrote the original. So, especially in the later ones, it's just really interesting. So this kind of presentation of something old in a new format, allowing you to see a bit behind it.
Yeah, that's cool.
That I find really fascinating. So that's kind of cool.
Cool.
Just an honorable mention, something I was going to say, a thing I wanted a new edition of for years that actually got a new edition last year is Everway. Which I have yet to run on the channel, but okay, one last question, and feel free for this one. This is going to be quickfire, right? You're allowed a number one and a runner-up. Okay, and you don't have to give the runner-up if you don't have more than one. Which IP that does not have an official, like, professional TTRPG release do you want to see turned into a TTRPG? I've got an instant answer for this, and I got a runner-up. The runner-up isn't something I've thought about a lot, but it's something that came up kind of last week on the Discord that I thought, yeah, actually. My number one is Mass Effect.
Mm-hmm.
Give me a Mass Effect TTRPG. I am begging you.
Mm-hmm.
And my runner-up, just because it got mentioned, is The Last of Us, actually. So 2 video games.
Oh, yeah.
But The Last of Us was mentioned in the context that the upcoming Walking Dead TTRPG from Free League, I mean, so easily homebrewed into Last of Us, right? It's got to be. So, yeah, those are my responses. Last of Us is more of an ad hoc thing, because it came up on the Discord last week. But Mass Effect, please. Mass Effect, please. Who's got another one? Anyone got their own? Jonny!
Do I have to pick an order?
No.
Okay.
Just say
So my 2 would be BioShock.
That was mine. Yeah.
Like Rapture specifically.
Yeah, I immediately
I
thought
suppose
Rapture as well.
with there could be like extension books put out for like the third one, but then also
Infinite,
other ideas as well. You could use it.
You could have a chapter.
You could use the rule set for whatever.
Yeah, because
you
it could just give you the setting of Columbia and maybe a chapter at the end for how to turn the how to flip it to show that the anti-fascists are the real fascists.
Yeah.
A little bit of commentary on Bioshock Infinite for you there.
But you could use it to make your own.
In case sorry, I should probably clarify that I think that in the story was bullshit before some people log onto this and say, yeah, the anti-fascists are the real fascists. Sorry, yeah, Bioshock, great.
But you could also, set up rules for putting it in your own setting as well, because there's always a man, there's always a lighthouse.
There's always a lighthouse, right?
But you could set it anywhere, anytime. The same sort of vibe to it.
You could have a hamlet that's set in fire. You could have a village that's always floating in chlorine. You could have. I'm being facetious, but yes, absolutely.
And my other one would be 1920 plus, aka the Scythe universe, because I'm a Scythe board game nerd, and or Iron Harvest, if people have played that video game, it's the same world. But yeah, I think that would make a cool RPG setting.
Interesting that we're all picking other games rather than like films or other stuff like that. Here's a random. I know I said we don't have to. Here's a random one. This is so weird. This isn't really an IP I want so much as I want a game that does this type of story as effectively as the film that does this type of story. Give me a Heat TTRPG, please. Give me a game that lets me run a 1990s Michael Mann heist film.
I feel like that's hard to do, isn't it? Probably, actually, is why we haven't seen it.
Yeah, I just thought that's a film. There we go. Anyone, Steve, Sam?
Like this pops into my head under pressure. I've no idea whether it would work, but Twin Peaks. I want to see a Twin Peaks RPG.
Yeah,
I don't know what the hell it would be, but
yeah, that would be interesting.
It's a little sidebar on how to talk backwards.
Yeah,
that would be good, though.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Yeah, my first choice was immediately Bioshock as well, so you beat me to that, Jonny. I was thinking a bit about how actually all of the sci-fi roleplay I can think of is not IP based. So I'd actually quite like to see some sci-fi based in an IP. Like, I don't know if you might know of this.
Dune, Expanse, Star Wars, 40K.
Okay. Yeah, there's loads, but none of those were the ones I was thinking of. The thing is about those, all of those aren't like spaceship based, though. Generally speaking, they're all like sci-fi, but in a world.
Yeah, they usually have spaceship rules, but they're not focused.
Whereas Traveller and Mothership and all those tend to be based. The spaceship ones, for some reason, aren't connected to spaceship.
Maybe there should be a Battlestar Galactica.
That was exactly what I was going to say. Battlestar seems like
there's a Firefly one, right?
Interesting stuff to it. Yeah.
Yes.
But I'm surprised there's no Battlestar one. Space. Also, I know it's often like light-hearted and fun, but I quite like to see a Star Trek one actually as well. And people take it a bit.
There's
seriously.
Definitely multiple. There's many Star Trek TTRPGs.
Oh, I take it back then.
I just thought of another one. Sliders.
Oh my god, Quantum Leap.
That would be fun. I'd enjoy that. Yeah, that'd be great.
Sliders.
Hit like a random table for what the difference is in the universe that you're going into, and you have to get through so many universes to get home.
Arguably Gimli's third best role.
Yes. Yeah.
And Gimli isn't number one.
Apparently, in chat there was a Battlestar Galactica TTRPG like 15 years ago, so it's been done.
That's fair enough.
That makes sense.
When it was actually popular.
Yeah.
That's fair enough. Okay, that's enough of the questions now. If you've got any other questions or comments, please pop them in chat. For context, if you check all the links down below, YouTube and Twitch is where we're active. Obviously, we stream on Twitch, but we put all our VODs on YouTube. There's also links to our social media, Patreon, Discord, if you're interested in those things. We run 2 weekly shows, kind of campaigns, Vason on Mondays usually, and Simba Room on Wednesdays. We also do one-shots once a month, lots of different systems. Get involved. There's a bunch of just so much stuff on our YouTube if you want to go watch the historical things. Comments or questions in the chat and we will address them. Sam needs to step off, so away from this, he's not like starting a fight. So he will step away as I flash up this comment.
I know, I enjoyed
Sandbox.
I'm referring to it as that from now on.
From Don't Kick Food. But thank you, Sam, and we will crack on with the other comments.
Take care.
Steve put doorbells and dog barks as a new TTRPG system will be publishing shortly. As soon as I said that, I just thought bed knobs and broomsticks, which related. Jonny wrote Zork Forever. We were talking about text-based adventures. When I was a kid, I only found out there were text-based adventures when I was a lot older because I had the original. They were originally like pick your own adventure books. And literally, the Zork games were complete 100% adaptations of those books. Anyway, I really liked them because they were really horrible. Like you know that you have been eaten by a Gru.
Oh God, yes.
Identical in the book where you're just like, oh, I'll go into that. Oh,
I didn't know they did books of them. Interesting.
Yeah, I bet. They may be in my attic back at home originally. I don't know, but I definitely had them. Don't Kick Food. Matt joining a bunch of random local games to put a team together, which was when he talked about me poaching Jonny from his own game. Yeah. 42. Would Matt run a Twilight one shot, as in Twilight 2000? I'm guessing.
I think it was when you were talking about vampires, so it might have been Twilight.
I don't
know.
Twilight.
I don't know.
Maybe. I can answer that in in 2 ways. If it's Twilight 2000, yes. If it's the other one,
all you'd have to do to run a convincing Twilight one shot is go into your like OBS and turn your contrast all the way, like saturation all the way up.
Yeah,
and then everyone will believe it.
Anytime anyone's about to enter into a fight, there's a mechanic for how long you stand there staring and hissing at each other. Or you just run it straight up as Vampire the Masquerade, but everyone's covered in glitter. Nice to see that Don't Kick Food was ahead of me when I was describing what I like to run, and he was like, "Hey, that's like Blades in the Dark." Yes, that's exactly. What else have we got? Anything else? No, I think that's it at the moment. So thank you very much for watching, folks. We hope you enjoyed it. It took a bit longer than we intended, but when we get talking, we're relentless. So thank you for joining us. Simbarum will be on Wednesday. Also, we've had a new follow, and I saw that they were active in the chat as well. Campston993, thank you for the follow. See you next time. Take care. Stay safe, folks. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.